recession, which is just getting started. I mean, we've barely gotten a taste of it. But unfortunately, all the blame is on the free market. All the blame is on capitalism. It's because there wasn't enough regulation. There was too much greed, right? And, you know, Alan Greenspan, or not Alan Greenspan, President Bush, in one of his speeches, said that Wall Street got drunk. And he was right. They were drunk. So was Main Street. The whole country was drunk. But what he doesn't point out is where they get the alcohol. Right? Why were they drunk? You know, obviously, Greenspan poured the alcohol. The Fed got everybody drunk. And the government helped out with their moral hazards and the tax codes and all the incentives and disincentives they put in, all the various ways that they interfered with the free market and removed the necessary balances that would have existed, that would have kept all this from happening. I mean, we've always had greedy people. Everybody's been greedy, not just Wall Street. But all of a sudden, everybody was greedy all at the same time? I mean, can't they understand that there's a trigger for this? There's a reason that everybody acted this way? I mean, normally, when people are greedy, they're also fearful of loss. And people's fear of loss overcomes their greed and checks their behavior. But what the government did repeatedly was try to remove the fear. They tried to make speculating as riskless as possible. First, they provided us with almost, costless money with which to speculate. And then they created the idea, or the Greenspan put, but whenever there's a problem, don't worry, the government is going to rescue you. The government's not going to let the stock market go down. The government's not going to let your bets go bad, so go ahead and keep placing them. That was the idea. That was the mentality. It was nothing that the free market did. In fact, the only entities that needed more regulations were the ones that the government created. I mean, Freddie and Fannie. I mean, if Freddie and Fannie didn't have a government guarantee, they wouldn't have needed any regulation because the market would have regulated them, right? People would have looked at their balance sheet and said, hey, you don't have any capital. You can't guarantee these mortgages. Who are you kidding, right? And they never could have expanded the way they did. It was only because the government stood behind them that people didn't care. People said, oh, the government will never let Fannie and Freddie go bankrupt. And they were right. They didn't. Right? That was the question. We didn't know. When I wrote Crash Proof and I said they're going to go bankrupt, I didn't know the answer to that question. I said, we don't know. Is the government going to let them fail, or is the government going to stand behind them? And I knew the worst thing was that they stood behind them. It would have been much better had George Bush said, you know what? We had no guarantee. We told you. In fact, on the prospectuses, when you bought the securities, on the front page, it said these securities are not guaranteed by the U.S. government. So the U.S. government could have said, we told you we didn't guarantee them. And we don't. Now, a lot of people would have been pissed. A lot of people would have lost money, but it would have been better than what we did. Because we didn't make the losses go away. We just postponed them, and we just put them on the backs of American taxpayers, or more realistically, holders of U.S. dollars. No, I was talking about Freddie and Fannie. So, yeah, they knew that no one cared that their balance sheet was small. Because the government guaranteed it. So the one place that the government needed to regulate was Fannie and Freddie. And that's where they didn't regulate it. In fact, every attempt to regulate them was thwarted by Congress. I mean, Freddie and Fannie gave huge amounts of money to both Democrats and Republicans, anybody that tried to regulate them. But the reason they needed to be regulated was because they operated with the government guarantee. Once you gave them that guarantee, then the government had to regulate them, and regulate them heavily. Because it was government money they were dealing with. It wasn't their own money. It wasn't private money. For normal lenders, we don't need any government regulation. The government can stay out. But in that circumstance, now, people can say, well, what about Wall Street? I mean, the subprime. There was a situation where there was no government guarantee. That's true. But Fannie and Freddie were the biggest buyers of subprime mortgages in the country. They were helping to legitimize the subprime market. They were big bidders in the subprime market. And, of course, it was Fannie and Freddie and FHA that really gave the impetus to the housing bubble, got it started, got the mentality there, is responsible for that way of thinking.